Hey, what is going on YouTube? I'm Nick Tello, and I'm going to do a mix breakdown of my song Sellout. So this song is very, very similar in terms of like the number of arrangement elements and production things to Sting, but it's more similar in terms of like the arrangement itself and the sounds and the style to like, I guess, keep your time. So yeah, there's a lot to work with. There's so much happening, especially in the very end of the song and like the outro chorus. So I'm gonna make sure that I cover all of that and how I get all the effects to sit nicely, all of the different, layers and synths to sit nicely, and keep the vocal in the front, make the drums loud enough. So anyway, let me just play a little section of the song to give you an idea what it sounds like. All right, that will definitely give you an idea of how the song goes. So as you can see, like, it's thick as far as like the arrangement goes. Like, there's a lot happening, and I'm gonna start with the vocals. That is basically a big part of like why this sounds. The song is heavily centered around vocals. So what I'll do is I'll solo. I'm not gonna cover the specifics of the vocal chain quite as much because I actually cover that like way more in depth in my Keep Your Time video. So if you want to see like my vocal chain a little bit more in depth, go watch the Keep Your Time video and I'm gonna explain it. I'll still walk through the vocal chain, but that'll give you a much better idea as far as like, my reasoning behind the decisions. But so here's what the vocals sound like, just kind of like solo by themselves.
Maybe I'll try, maybe I'll stick, maybe I'll write some pointless shit. Run it up high, covered in grit, work it out, die, a narcissist, anything goes.
So yeah, as you can see, like I have like a ton of vocals happening here. The biggest thing, the most important thing by far is panning. So first I have, my two lead vocals that are panned a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, these kind of center ones. You can see these are panned, 30% this way, 30% that way-ish. After that, I have my main kind of like left-right. Those left-rights, the left-rights are panned, the low octave left-rights, those are panned like, hard left and hard right. And then, on top of that, I have some harmonies, and the harmonies a little bit different. I actually pan the harmonies kind of a little bit more towards the center in this case. Yeah, like 17%. Yeah, with harmonies, I've found that like you don't really have to have them directly on the center, but having them a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right is pretty helpful. And then I have this other ad-lib section. So this other ad-lib, the like call and response situation, the biggest thing with the call and response ad-libs is that I actually like pan these from left to right. These melody libs, I guess you could say. So let me see, where did I pan this? Where's the panning? Yeah. So this is the thing with these like call and response ad-libs is I pan them from left to right, and this is something I do a lot. Like I love doing this. I think that it is possible to go overboard with this, but as you can see, this is only like 40% pan that way, and then 40% the other way. So like, I have three of these. I have like a low, a high, and then a harmony. Maybe I'll try, maybe I'll stick, maybe I'll write some pointless shit. And there's obviously like a fuck ton of delay on it too, which I'll get to in a second, but maybe I'll try. So I have that one, maybe I'll try. That one, maybe I'll try. So all those together, and then I kind of just pan them left to right, because if I had them on one side the whole time, it would get kind of like boring. I don't know. So left to right. Maybe I'll try, maybe I'll stick, maybe I'll write some pointless shit. You know what I mean? So that's huge. So aside from panning, the other thing that I do is I actually route all my vocals to, I route all my main vocals to a main vocal bus, and I route all my backups and all my harmonies to this harmony vocal bus. So here's just those harmonies. Maybe I'll try, maybe I'll stick, maybe I'll write some pointless shit. And then here's all my main vocals going to the same vocal bus. Maybe I'll try, maybe I'll stick, maybe I'll write. So like You typically don't need to have a vocal chain for every single vocal, especially when you have, like, if I was going to put a vocal chain on every single one of these vocals, my computer would hate me. So the way that I kind of fix that is I just have like one vocal chain that has like a majority of these vocals. And let me just kind of go through and let me just bypass a lot of these plugins, and then that'll kind of give you an idea. Let me just go through the vocal chain really quickly. Here's my main vocal chain just to give you an idea. If you want, like I said, if you want a more in-depth thing, go watch the Keep Your Time video, but that's kind of what it sounds like just with the effects on it. Then I have a de-esser on here. It's a little aggressive because I have so many vocals happening, and my vocal is also really aggressive, so some of those consonants are just a lot. And then my, housekeeping. This first stage of compression, bringing down 5 decibels or so. Soothe is then smoothing it out. My vocal is crazy around like 2.7, 2.9K I've discovered. Then this FG Red tucking the vocal in on a really fast attack time. Another 5 dB of gain reduction. And then compressors add a lot of mid-range sometimes, so I just kind of tame that with a multi-band compressor. After that, I boost it 8K with this EQ. So that gives you an idea. Yeah, and then I have, same thing happening for my harmonies. The only difference is I actually send my delay. I mainly send the mains to the delay because, I always use a ping pong delay, and I don't want too many vocals happening in the ping pong delay because it'll get distracting. So I only found it necessary just to send the main vocals to the delay. Yeah, same amount for the mains and the harmonies of reverb, but I only send the mains to that chorus, that sort of like chorus bus that I have here. And then the only difference is my ad-libs have like, some different processing. Like I've gone through the ad-lib processing on the Keep Your Time video, so if you want more specifics on it, the only difference is I kind of just compress the fuck out of it with RVox and then just like filter it a little bit differently. As you could see, it has like a telephone filter on it. That's why these ad-libs sound the way that they do, is because of this filter. So this actually helps them cut through a little bit more, this telephone filter. By default, it's like this. But I thought some of this other top end was actually helping the vocal cut through in the mix. Big part of why these telephone sort of like call and response vocals cut through is because of this filter. The reason why people use this filter is because it helps ad-libs and, certain other vocals that you want to emphasize cut through in the mix, because these frequencies, particularly these telephonic frequencies, cut through. They're actually very annoying, and I usually EQ them down because of that, because they're super like resonance sounding, and, but like, that's why people use these ad-libs. These filters on the ad-libs is because of that. That's why the ad-libs sound the way they sound, other than like, the delay. So after that, I have this kind of tape saturation. Let me actually go back to soloing the vocals. So this adds a little more juice. Not by a lot. And then the other thing I have is I have this kind of like, this is interesting because I don't normally do this, but I'm actually saturating the top end of the vocal using this plugin. Here's without it. Here's with it. So that's why the vocals sound so like crispy, is because I'm actually doing some like, I'm putting an exciter on just the top end of the vocal. You can kind of hear it. Let me just mute the ad-libs for a second. So I'm just throwing an exciter on the top end of the vocals, and that's kind of like what's giving it that like, top end excitement. I don't know how else to describe it. Cool. And then after that, I have this EQ on here that's just adding a little bit more warmth to it and a little bit more shine as well. So I usually like, even things out earlier in the process, and then I kind of bring it back. But because of the fact that I've done things like, soothe and multi-band compression to the mid-range, when I bring that back with another EQ, it's more even and consistent sounding. So here's without it. And here's with it. You know what I mean? It has a little bit more body around this like 200 hertz range, which typically is muddy, but like in this case, it kind of works. So yeah, after that, I have, my effects. So with my effects, yeah, these effects are a little bit of a rabbit hole because what I did is I had 3 different reverbs, I believe. Yeah, I had these 3 effects are actually just taken out of a Make Pop music video on like, mixing pop vocals. So you should probably go watch that if you want more of a breakdown on like the slapback delay, the short verb, and the chorus plugin that I use. So I have multiple reverbs. So I have my main vocal reverb here, and that's basically just like a really shiny plate. I think it's like a CLA this like preset. And this reverb is very, very shiny. The other thing that I do though is I sidechain my vocal to a dynamic EQ on the reverb so that it ducks down the frequencies where it's conflicting. And I kind of just like fish around, find out where the reverb is kind of like fighting the vocal, and then duck that down and make it dynamic so that the vocal, when the vocal is there, these frequencies all duck down and make space for the vocal. So the other thing I do is I have my main vocal delay, which is literally just like a 16th. Normally, I don't do it this fast. I do an 8th note, but I guess the movement for the delay had to be a little bit quicker here. So I just do a ping pong delay that's really filtered around like, here in this case, like 5K-ish, and then, cut out everything in the low end. So that's pretty heavy. But the other thing is that I have my compressor going to, like I have my vocal going to the sidechain of this compressor so that it's actually ducking the delays down when the vocal's there. So that's another trick that I do. And then I have my vocal effects, and my vocal effects are actually, I'm running the kick to the vocal effects. Yeah. You can see that the kick is causing this to duck. So I have my kick sidechains to all my vocal effects so that the kick kind of like gets that stuff out of the way. Yeah, and then other than that, I have another delay for other things and another vocal reverb. And the reason for this is because I wanted my ad-libs to be in a different space as the rest of, everything else. Like I could have sent the ad-libs here to their own delay, but like I just needed to be a little bit more specific with like, things like my delay times, having that sort of like sit right, because if you listen to this, maybe I'll try, maybe I'll stick, maybe I'll write some pointless shit, run it up high, covered in grit, freaking out, die, a narcissist, anything goes, everything's like, it's not really like those vocals aren't really the same with that delay. And one thing that I discovered is that the reverbs being created out of the main vocals and the ad-lib vocals were not actually playing nice with each other. I normally never do this. To be honest, like I found it completely necessary to send the main vocals and the ad-libs to their own reverb, because I think the reverb times needed to be able to react to those sources independently for it to kind of like mesh well together. So that's the reasoning behind why I did that. And then I had another delay. So the reason I had another delay sending from the main, like those call and response ad-libs. So the reason I gave those call and response ad-libs their own delay is because of the fact that like I put that compressor on here to actually sidechain the vocal to this compressor. But when the main vocal is sending to this compressor as well, then the main vocal is causing those delays from the ad-libs to actually duck down, when in reality, I actually don't want that to happen. I want those delays only to be ducked down when the ad-libs are happening. So as a result, I sidechain just the ad-libs to the compressor on this delay. So it's not actually ducking that delay down unless it's from the ad-libs. So that delay is present and doing its thing even though the main vocals are happening. So that's kind of why I gave this delay its own. I gave the ad-libs their own kind of like delay to play with. Yeah, the other thing that I do again is I just sidechain the kick to these other vocal effects. And I kind of, sent those vocal effects to their own bus as well. And then the other thing that I did is I had this, I went over this just a little bit in the production video, but I have this like, affected vocal. And all that is that's basically just like me running the vocal through a tube screamer and then through a filter and then through like a ridiculous delay. So like through this repeater. So that's how you get that sort of sound. Yeah, just run your vocals through a guitar pedal. Like, what are you waiting for? The other main element I'd probably want to go over is these electric guitars. So these electric, these kind of like, you know. So yeah, what I did with these guitars to make them sound the way that they did is to actually, so I'll start from the beginning. So first thing I did, added this EQ to really just bring that top end out a lot. Even though there's not a whole lot there, I mean, the guitar is a mid-range instrument, but I cut out everything below here as well because, like, I got my other grit synth that's kind of taking care of that range as a whole. So, like, that's the thing. It's like you got to pick your battles as far as, like, which synth is going to carry what. So the grit synth is actually carrying the mid-range in this section. So I didn't find the need for the guitars to actually, like, have any of that mid-range. So I just cut it out, and I think the guitars sound good, you know, without it either way. Yeah, and then I have another EQ kind of taking out a little bit of the mids because I wanted to create space for the vocal there, just in the middle channel. Yeah, so I cut that out. And then I added our compressor just to kind of like, you know, I've said this before, like if you're actually recording an instrument, especially if it's a guitar, like not all those notes are going to be consistent. So that's why I kind of compressed it to create some consistency between all those notes. Yeah, and then I have CLA 76 doing a little bit more of that, basically. And it's a really fast release time to kind of bring those notes out a little bit more. You see how the release time being really short brings that tail out. See how the notes really cut out and they, you know, they stand out and they have more kind of like body to them and more length as well, which typically I wouldn't really be trying to do. But in this case, bringing that out caused them to pop through in the mix a little bit more. So that's why I did that. And then let me guess, I undid it with a smack attack. Yep. Okay, so I added a little bit more attack and then I took down a little bit of that sustain now that it's a little bit more controlled. I swear to God, I'd just be like mixing in circles sometimes. But I mean, it comes back to, that's what it seems like, but really it comes back to my philosophy of like evening things out and then like, you know, adding more character to them after you've like, you know, tamed things and made them consistent. And then the biggest thing about this is that I didn't actually like do 16th notes. I just have a delay on here. So that's what gives it that like real depth is this delay right here. Yeah, so it's just a ping pong. It's like heavily filtered, so it's only kind of this mid-range area, but the attack pokes through because the attack is what exists in this mid-range area. So yeah, and after that, just another EQ on certain sections where this EQ comes into play. But you know, I run my EQs through, I run my sounds through filters in specific sections, and then overall, it's my guitars. It looks like I just added some 200 hertz back in just to give it a little bit more warmth, and then I added this EQ in just to do the exact same thing because towards the end of my mix, I felt like I needed a little bit more warmth. So it's like, I got to pick like, where am I going to get that warmth from? So a lot of times I turn to the instruments for that. And that's what I did here. Huge difference. Here's without it. Here's with it. You hear it the most in that lower harmony. But yeah. So then for my piano, so now I can kind of bring this guy back because he's so annoying because he just like doesn't know how to like shut the fuck up because I have him like automated or whatever. So that's not doing anything. Not doing a whole lot here. Kind of just taking out the low end and some annoying resonances. And after that, Soothe is literally just like a preset. This preset's pretty dope. I kind of just like gives it a little more body and also takes down some of that sharpness. So here's without it. Kind of just evens the sound out. And then I just have this here, kind of like that first hit is really aggressive. So adding a compressor that compresses the differences between the dynamics in terms of like the hits, you'll still have that illusion of like the dynamics there because of like how it sounds just in general and how it's like programmed, I guess, as far as like velocity or if you played it for real. But like adding that compressor just makes it so that it like doesn't poke through in the mix so much, you know, and it just like kind of chills in its own pocket without being distracting. So yeah, and then after that, I have some other pianos here that aren't really worth going into. Strings I've already gone over in other tracks. Yeah, the only thing I did to this really loud Sylenth is just OTT. And I cut out the lows and boosted the highs a little bit, and then just added OTT on. So OTT, like again, like OTT just kind of like, it's a multiband compressor, but it's almost like a band-aid. Like kind of just like, it juices up the top end overall. If you have it like, well, I never go above like 30% on OTT because it's so intense. But like adding OTT on really just gives it a little bit more top end, but it's like a consistent top end. I don't know how to describe it. So here's without it. Here's with it. And another thing that it does is it brings out the reverb in the sound. So that's huge. Like it's actually compressing it in a way that brings that reverb, and it kind of like glues the reverb in the synth to the sound, you know, to the actual synth itself. So that's one really cool use for OTT, is to just glue the reverbs to the sounds. Cool. And then some of these other sounds, like this arpeggiated sound that I have kind of towards the end here. I'll just play this section because I know that nothing's gonna be like solo safe or whatever, but like this sound right here. So I'm just gonna undo everything basically. So really what this is it's a serum patch. I went over this a little bit in my other, I went over the sound itself a little bit more in depth in my, you know, mix video, but here it is, you know, just with the, let me just kind of walk through the plugins. So first I distort it with Trash, add some saturation with Magneto, EQ some of that low end out, and then add Neutron to transient shape it, make the attack a little bit less crazy in this case. Yeah, and really bring the sustain down. And bringing the sustain down on a transient shaper really actually adds like some space in between the notes and helps you like differentiate between each note when you're listening to it. And then one of the biggest things about this sound is the delay as well. But the delay is heavily filtered. So the delay being heavily filtered really lets it so just the attack and just the main kind of like tone, I guess, of the note pulls through. Because you can kind of hear it there for a sec. So filtering your delays is huge when it comes to synths, because we only have so much space in the frequency spectrum to like include things in. And then after that, I just have this going through a bandpass. That also comes back to like being very mindful of your mix just in general, because like, you know, if a producer had sent me this, I probably wouldn't have done this, but because of the fact that, you know, this is my song that I'm producing, I'm comfortable putting it through a bandpass and being like, yeah, because fuck the top end, because there's already so much happening in the top end, and the low end is already spoken for with all those other synths and you know, the 808 obviously. So, you know, that's why I kind of run this through a bandpass and let it exist solely in the mid-range. It's crazy without it, you know what I mean? And I already have, listen to how much is happening in this post-chorus. You know what I mean? There's so much happening. So if I had this without the filter, like, you're just like adding to the chaos, you know what I mean? So it's like I was hesitant to add that sound in the first place because obviously like there's so much happening. How am I gonna make it work? The answer is a bandpass filter. So, and then I just have this kind of taking down that low end a little bit more, and also just taming some of those middle frequencies, so some of the mid-range frequencies in the mid channel with a mid-side EQ. So moving on to this like submarine sound. So I have this other sound happening in you know, most of the hooks. That's like this. So that's kind of like, I wanted to make that sound as much like a whistle as possible. So what I have that is like just a ton of reverb and delay, and I also distort it with like, you know, Trash and Magneto. It's obviously like ridiculous, but the same idea. Bandpass that bitch. Or no, I mean just cut out the top end to make it less crazy. You know, yeah, I feel like that's like huge, like, you know, is having some of this stuff only exist in the mid range and being okay with that because its goal is to fill out the mid range anyway. So yeah, then I added a little bit more with a transient shaper as far as the attack goes and bringing the sustain down again to kind of differentiate between those notes. And then I added H delay to just add a little bit more delay to it. Just adds a little bit more space to it. And then this is the big thing. It's just the reverb is at 50% wet. And I typically don't put reverbs on sounds themselves unless the reverb is integral to the sound itself, in which case I'll put it on. One advantage to this is that you can put a compressor on the sound with the reverb on it, and it'll actually give you, it'll actually glue the reverb to the sound, which is really a cool thing. And it'll definitely bring the reverb out if you're okay with that. But yeah, with the reverb on it, it's night and day. You know what I mean? It just puts it further in the back and kind of gives it that sort of like, its goal is to be a kind of like a whistly sound in the back. So then I put Soothe on it just to kind of like tame some of those resonances a little bit. And then, so moving on to this grit sound here. So this sound, I actually did spend some time mixing it down and making it sound the way that I wanted it to sound. Here it is dry. But I wanted to bring out that grit, you know what I mean? I wanted to bring that out. Kind of took down some of the low end slightly. And then I used this EQ to just bring down some of that 60 hertz because I know that, the bass is spoken for with the 808. So like, I don't need that 60 hertz there. I also saturated the top end. So this kind of just like adds a little bit more saturation to just the top end to give it a little bit more excitement. And then I guess that's an exciter. I'm not really sure the difference between an exciter and a saturation, to be completely honest. I know it's the same school of thing though. And then I believe this is the kick drum. Oh no, that's just normal compression. Okay. That's just kind of tucking the sound in a little bit. Then I got an EQ, bringing down some of this mid-range because it was a little bit crazy. And then again, what am I even doing here? Oh, I'm literally just lowering the low end with this. Okay. And the other thing that I have is I have just like, I went over this a little bit more in depth in the production video, but just that tuplet, like eighth note, if that's what that's called, is a tuplet, but that delay is huge. And I encourage people to try using a tuplet instead of just a normal eighth, just because that is a very, very specific type of rhythm that works really well and is very groovy. As opposed to, hold on, wait. Oops. It's a little too like, I don't know, like sterile and like military, like eighth note, versus this. I fuck much more heavily with that. So yeah. And then I have all my synths going to a bus that the kick is sidechained to. That's the kick sidechained to those things. And then all my synths, basically, I have all my synths going to a bus. And towards the end of my mix, like I said, I wanted more mid-range out of my synths. So what I did is I kind of just like, boosted that mid-range with an EQ and a virtual tape machine. So I added this virtual tape machine to all this stuff on the bus. Juices it up a little bit, adds a little more character. And then an EQ that boosts these two mid-rangey areas. That and this. So that stuff fills the mix out a little bit more. So again, like if I feel like my mix doesn't have enough mid-range, I'll go back to these like overall buses, like these all synth buses, and I'll just add this EQ on just to juice up certain frequencies where I find that there's a lot of goodness in. Yeah, and then I've already gone over the 808 stuff in a lot of my other videos, so I'm not going to do that right now. Same with the kick. Go watch either the I go over the kick and watch your luck. I go over the 808. in both Watch Your Luck and I think Keep Your Time. So, you know, you can go to those videos and look at the timestamp and just watch like more in depth, because I use the same sounds in like pretty much all my songs. Up to this point, you know, I'm changing things up now that I'm on to like my next batch of songs. But like for a lot of these songs, I use the same kick and the same 808, same everything. So yeah, that's the only thing. That's kind of like my approach to like, you know, myself as a musician and a producer, is like I have my sounds that kind of define me. So cool. And then so for these affected drums, like the drums kind of towards the beginning of the song, yeah, so the way that I got these drums to sound super like distorted is just running them through trash. Yeah, so basically like these drums are all kind of just going through like an effect. They're all going through trash, and that's how they sound so distorted. See, I have like a drum FX like bus here, and that's how that's working. And then with these claps and like the pre-chorus, for example, what I did with these claps, bro, is basically just neutron, kind of just like saturating some of that top end. Yeah. And then after that, I just got an EQ, kind of taking down some of these annoying frequencies, and then a little bit of that top end just so I don't run into problems later. And then smack attack, just bringing up some attack there. Okay, and then my snare bus. So this is literally the exact same snare as like, you know, Keep Your Time, I'm pretty sure. So you could probably just go watch that video. Watch the video on the snare mixdown and Keep Your Time. But I mean, I'll go through it briefly, basically just cutting out the low end, adding a little bit more warmth or saturation with the NLS channel, tucking it in with a compressor, and adding some top end, adding some 400. The trick is adding the 400 with the API, just for some body. Yeah. And then, what else? So with the hats, I'm running my hi-hats through trash, and that's kind of how I get my hi-hats to sound, you know, pretty cool. Just generally like nice and like saturated and crunchy, like these extra hi-hats. I'm running them through trash, and then I'm using this to really bring out that top end. You know what I mean? Here's without it. So boring. And then, yeah. I mean, you do have to be careful because that can become a problem later in mastering. But luckily, these hi-hats aren't too harsh, so you can bring up that 10K no problem. So reverse cymbals, I've covered this a few times, but like reverse cymbals, the trick with reverse cymbals is just like using either subtractive EQ and soothe, or like subtractive EQ or soothe to like kind of take down some of that, like, hold up. And then just a compressor that kind of moves with that'll kind of make that sound a little bit more consistent in volume, and also like, you know, keep it so that like it starts loud, and then as it gets louder, it compresses, so it kind of dials it back with the compressor, and overall that reverse cymbal will just be more consistent in volume without losing that illusion of the dynamics. Here it's a little bit more subtle, but in other songs I'm a little bit more heavy-handed with it. And then the other thing I do is I kind of just take down some of this annoyingness, and then I take down some of that top end with a multi-band compressor in the top end, which also really helps. Like you could put a de-esser on, and that works too. But this is what I did here. I kind of just compressed the top end with C4. If I try to add top end in my master later and I have too much top end, then it's going to be a problem. So I use C4 just to tame the top end of the overall drum bus. And then I guess this was just to take care of, that's not important. Cool. And then this other pan noise, let me see if this is even worth going into. Yeah, this is kind of like how I process a lot of my effects. Like, first of all, the pan noise is heavily just like, there's like an auto pan on here. That gets activated halfway through. So that's what kind of gives it that sound. And then after that, I just take out some of that low end that's unnecessary. Put Soothe on just to kind of like smooth it out a little bit. And I think that's it actually. Yeah, that's all I did there. Yeah, same thing with a lot of these other sounds. Like I kind of just like EQ it, put Soothe on it to make it not annoying, and then maybe I'll EQ some stuff. Like the hey, I EQ'd a little bit. Like this hey right here. Like that, I just wanted a little bit more out of with the API, so I just a little bit though. Like here's without it, here's with it. Yeah, so I just added a little bit more to that. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. The only other thing I'll say is that, yeah, I have this like movie boom, and all I really did here in this section, in this like with this boom sound, was just this thing. That's literally just like, so here's what it sounds like normally. It's obviously like dumb bassy, so cut out everything below like 20 hertz, and then this compressor is just doing all the heavy lifting. It's just like compressing it. It's just like, no, like chill. So like this on the all setting, like I use the CLA 76 on the all setting for like parallel stuff, but also like mainly like things like taiko drums or toms or really hard, like, you know, it works really well with like super heavy drum sounds, you know, like dramatic as fuck drum sounds. So that's kind of what it's doing here. Yeah, and then I use smack attack to kind of just like, you know, juice up the attack and take down the sustain. Yeah, and then I put reverb on it because, you know, you could put reverbs on kicks if it's for effect, and if there's nothing else in the low end, that's gonna get cluttered up by the, you know, low end being reverberated by a reverb. Yeah, so that's how I got that to sound the way that sounds. Is just compress the fuck out of it and then put reverb on it. So yeah, cool. And then, you know, I have a couple extra reverbs here that are kind of like, I usually try to be as specific as possible with my reverbs. Like, you know, like for example, like I have a snare sound that's happening, you know, on certain things. Like I have a crunchy snare bus, snare plate. Yeah, I have a plate. And I did something else. Like I actually put a chorus on my snare to make it wider, which is cool, and I think that more people should try that because it's a neat tool. Yeah, let me play it. Here's the snare plate with the snare. Yeah. So plates with snares. Plates always work on snares, trust me. And then, you know, here's the snare. I'm gonna turn the snare chorus up. Yeah. And then I just have smack attack kind of bringing the attack of that down, because you don't really need attack to come from the sides, you know what I mean, or sustain or whatever. But yeah, I run it through a snare chorus and then on like the 3 setting or whatever, and then I just bring the attack down of that snare chorus, so it's not decentralizing the attack from the main snare, I guess. But yeah, and then after that, you know, I have a couple extra reverbs here, and I just have a compressor. The kick is side chaining to this reverb bus, so the kick is side chaining to the reverb. So that's another thing that I do to kind of keep my reverbs in check and keep the kick kind of like, you know, up front. So
Maybe I'll stick, maybe I'll write some pointless shit.
yeah. And that's pretty much it for the whole mix. Like, I'm pretty sure I covered everything. Yeah, I hope this gave you a good idea as to, like, you know, how I got all these things to kind of, like, fit together and, you know, get the arrangement to sound good and not so cluttered. Because, I mean, like, it is cluttered, but it's also, like, everything is kind of, like, cared for and taken care of as far as, like, you know, making sure that things fit together frequency-wise and compressing stuff so that it's not, like, you know, poking out too much. So I hope that was helpful in terms of, you know, giving you an idea of how I kind of approach this mix. So yeah, I you know, thank you so much for watching, and please, as always, just check out the song, because that's, you know, why I make music, is to, like, you know, I make music because I love making music, but also, like, I love sharing it with people. I love sharing my process with people too, which is why I make these videos. But yeah, it would mean the world if you just checked out the song as well, and you know, just to give you some added context for this video too. But yeah, otherwise, thank you so much, and you know, as always, like, comment, subscribe, because I'm planning on doing more of these after this first batch of song as well, hopefully. And you know, it definitely helps me to know that these were helpful so that I can justify doing them again in the future for all my songs, because I haven't seen someone, or I see people do mixed breakdowns of their songs, but like, you know, not for like every song. So I'm trying to figure out if this is something that I should incorporate into like my music brand as a whole, or if I should just do it every once in a while. So it's super helpful to know, like, if you want me to do these for every single song because it's just so valuable for you, then I would appreciate you just letting me know. Either leave a comment, subscribe, or just show me love in some way. Just because that feedback is crucial for me figuring out if this was good, if this was, you know, helpful for people. So yeah, that's the end of that rant. And you know, I will see you next time on the next one. Thanks for watching.